There are people who think they can do whatever they want, that the world revolves around them, that any obstacle in the way can be removed just because they've decided to do so. This woman, Patricia Langley, she was exactly that kind of person. It all started when I, James Wilson, bought this house. It was nothing fancy, nothing gaudy. Just a little corner of peace away from unbearable neighbors. At least that's what I thought until I discovered that Patricia could terrorize the neighborhood like a medieval tyrant. She was part of the dreaded HOA, that neighborhood association that theoretically serves to maintain order in the neighborhood, but in practice only serves to give power to people with dictator complexes. It didn't take long for her to show up. Already in my first week living there, she arrived with that air of superiority, holding a clipboard as if she were about to hand me a court summons. The conversation was short. Basically, she wanted me to change the color of the fence, cut the grass to a specific height, and remove my truck from the driveway because it wasn't in keeping with the aesthetic standards of the neighborhood. I smiled, said a polite no, and closed the door in her face. That's when the war began. She's just getting started with you. A voice called from across the street as Patricia marched away from my door. I turned to see a woman in her mid-30s, watering her impeccably maintained flower beds. She introduced herself as Dr. Eliza Sharma, a local veterinarian and my across-the-street neighbor. Patricia targets all the newcomers. Eliza continued, setting down her watering can and crossing over to my yard. 3 families have moved out in the past year because of her harassment. Is she even allowed to enforce these rules? I asked. Eliza smiled wryly. That's the interesting part. Her nephew, Bradley Thompson, sits on the town council and helped draft the HOA bylaws. There's purposely a lot of gray area that she exploits. This information would prove crucial in the days to come. First came the notices, then the written warnings. When she saw that I simply ignored every attempt to impose her crazy rules, she started to get more aggressive. I began to notice her car parked near my house frequently. It was as if she was waiting for me to slip up, to make the slightest mistake so that she could attack. The icing on the cake was when I decided to change the front gate. The old one was fragile. Any little push, and it would topple like wet cardboard. Since I like to do things the right way, I had a new reinforced gate installed with steel on the inside, beautiful, discreet, and above all, impossible to knock down without a battle tank. Sounds like an irrelevant detail, but Patricia simply hated it. The following week, she already had an official notice from the HOA saying that the gate was not in compliance with community standards and that it needed to be removed. I had to laugh. Oh, so now quality gates were forbidden too. I took the notice and threw it straight in the garbage can. That must have made her frog with rage, because it was from then on that she started walking in front of my house more often, always looking at the gate with a look like she was about to commit an atrocity. One evening, as I was trimming hedges in my front yard, a black Tesla pulled up to my curb. A well-dressed man in his early 30s stepped out and approached me with the cautious smile of someone about to deliver unwelcome news. Mr. Wilson, I'm Bradley Thompson, HOA board member and town council liaison. So this was Patricia's infamous nephew. He certainly didn't look like the dragon lady's relative. His demeanor was pleasant. His handshake firm, but not aggressive. Let me guess, I said, you're here about my gate. Bradley winced. Actually, I'm here unofficially to warn you. Aunt Patricia is escalating. She's scheduled an emergency HOA meeting about your property tomorrow night, and she's bringing up legal action. On what grounds? I asked, surprised by his apparent concern. She's claiming your gate violates 8 different HOA bylaws and constitutes a hazardous structure. He handed me a business card. Look, I can't be seen openly opposing her. But if you check section 12.3 of the bylaws, you'll find some useful information. Just don't tell her where you got the tip. As Bradley drove away, I wondered why Patricia's own nephew would undermine her. Later that night, Eliza filled me in. Bradley's only on the HOA board because Patricia forced the previous member out. He's trying to restore some balance, but he has to be careful. Patricia's husband is Senator Langley's campaign manager. They have connections, and Patricia did. It was a Tuesday morning. I was in the kitchen drinking coffee when I heard a louder than normal engine roar. It wasn't just any car. It was Patricia's SUV. And before I could understand what was happening, I saw the most absurd scene I've ever witnessed. She slammed her foot down on the accelerator and drove straight into my gate. The noise of the crash was so loud that it echoed throughout the neighborhood. But there was one detail. The gate wasn't broken, but her car, that one crumpled like a soda can. If I said I was surprised by what happened, I'd be lying. This woman had such an obsession with control that, frankly, it was only a matter of time before she did something absolutely insane. But I confess that not even in my best daydreams did I imagine that she would come up with a brilliant idea of ramming her own car into my gate. Now, put yourself in my place for a moment. You're at home enjoying your morning, having a quiet coffee, when suddenly, BM, a noise worthy of a Hollywood action scene explodes outside. You run to see what's happened, and there she is, sitting in the driver's seat with the car, stuck in the gate like an insect crushed in a windshield. The scene was a masterpiece of chaos. Her SUV's hood was folded up like a piece of aluminum foil. The front bumper was practically non-existent, and one of the headlights had been left hanging, flashing as if the car was trying to call for help. And the gate? The gate didn't even move. Patricia, on the other hand, was possessed. She slammed the car door open, stomped hard on the ground, and turned to me with an expression of pure indignation, as if I was the one in the wrong. She shook herself like a wet dog, and with her hands on her hips, let out a scream that was, "Sabotage! Sabotage! Let me get this straight." She decides to accelerate a car weighing almost 2 tons against my property, breaks her own vehicle in the process, and I'm the saboteur. All I could do was cross my arms and watch her, waiting anxiously for the crazy justification that would follow. This gate shouldn't be so sturdy. You reinforced it illegally. I almost choked with laughter. What exactly did she expect? That I would install a styrofoam gate? "This isn't safe," she continued, hitting the metal with her open hand. "You could have caused a serious accident." I looked around hoping that some neighbor would come out and confirm that I was hearing it right, but apparently it was just me and her craziness at the moment. To my surprise, I heard the distinctive sound of camera shutter clicking rapidly from nearby. Eliza was standing at the edge of her driveway in hospital scrubs, documenting the entire scene. For the HOA archives, she called out with a barely suppressed smile. Patricia whirled toward her. "Dr. Sharma, you stop that immediately." "Sorry, Patricia," Eliza replied calmly. "As HOA secretary, I'm required to document property damage incidents within the community. It's bylaw 4.7, which I believe you added last year." Patricia's face contorted in fury at having her own rules used against her. This detail would become crucial later. Patricia started pacing back and forth, snorting, probably trying to find a way to turn this into a situation where she would be the victim. But let's face it, crashing a car into a gate isn't exactly a mistake you can throw at others. The best moment was when she finally stopped, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath as if she was preparing to say something extremely intelligent. And then, with all the certainty in the world, she let it out. "This isn't going to stay like this. I'm going to call the police." Yes, you read that right. She wanted to call the police. I swear for a second I thought I'd heard wrong, but no. She actually pulled out her cell phone and dialed, probably expecting the officers to come running to arrest me for having a working gate. Things started to get even better when finally the neighbors started coming out of their houses. First, Mrs. Peterson, who lived next door, with her fluffy bathrobe and a cup of tea in her hand. Then Mr. Martinez, who just crossed his arms and watched the scene with an amused twinkle in his eye. Soon, a few more people appeared, forming a small crowd around what could only be described as the most hilarious spectacle of the morning. The car was still there, a monument to failure. While Patricia screamed into the phone, trying to explain the inexplicable. It was then that I realized that she had also noticed the audience, and suddenly her posture changed. If before she had been furious, now she was trying to look like a wronged victim. She turned to her neighbors and, in the most dramatic tone possible, began to speak. "That gate is a threat to the whole community. It could have hurt someone. Look what happened to my car." Mrs. Peterson took a sip of her tea and arched an eyebrow. "Your car hit the gate, not the other way around. That was an accident caused by negligence," she insisted. This time, it was Mr. Martinez who answered. "The only accident here was your decision to speed into a metal gate." At that, some of the neighbors laughed. And do you know what happens when people like Patricia realize they're being ridiculed? They go into full denial mode. Bradley's Tesla pulled up alongside the growing crowd. He jumped out, looking genuinely shocked at the scene before him. "Aunt Patricia, what happened?" he asked, hurrying over to check if she was hurt. "Your aunt just declared war on an inanimate object," Eliza explained dryly. "The gate won." Bradley looked from the mangled SUV to my intact gate and back to his aunt, who was now glaring at him expectantly, clearly waiting for him to take her side. "Tell them, Bradley," Patricia demanded. Tell them how this gate violates Code 7.3 of our bylaws. Bradley's face went through a remarkable series of expressions: shock, embarrassment, and finally, something that looked like resolve. Actually, Aunt Patricia, he said carefully, I checked the bylaws last night after our conversation. Mr. Wilson's gate is fully compliant with Section 12.3, which allows for security reinforcements of perimeter structures provided they maintain aesthetic consistency with the neighborhood's visual theme. The crowd murmured in surprise. Patricia's jaw dropped at this unexpected betrayal. You're lying, she hissed. I have the bylaws right here, Bradley replied, pulling out his phone. Would you like me to read the exact wording? Help arrived a few minutes later. A policeman in a tow truck because, well, her car wasn't going anywhere without help. The policeman got out of his vehicle with that, "This is going to ruin my day," expression and came straight over to us. What happened here? Before I could answer, Patricia practically jumped forward. Officer, this man illegally reinforced the gate to his house. My car crashed and look what happened. This can't be allowed here. The officer looked at her. He looked at the wrecked car. He looked at the intact gate. Then he looked at her again, and then in the most tired voice in the world, he asked, "Did you hit his gate on purpose?" She widened her eyes, as if it was absurd that the question had even been asked. That's not the point. The point is that this gate is dangerous. The policeman sighed. He had already understood everything. Ma'am, what's dangerous here is speeding a car against a fixed object. If his gate complies with the law, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. The problem here is you. That's it. Silence fell like lightning. Patricia was speechless for the first time since this soap opera began. Officer, Bradley interjected, stepping forward. As a town council member, I can confirm that Mr. Wilson's gate is in complete compliance with both HOA bylaws and municipal building codes. Patricia stared at her nephew in utter disbelief. What are you doing? She whispered furiously. My job, Bradley replied quietly, which is to ensure fair application of the rules, not selective enforcement. While the policeman finished filling in the reports, I just leaned back against the fence satisfied. My gate had expired, her car, not so much. If there's one thing these people can't stand, it's being contradicted, even worse, being humiliated in public. And Patricia, well, she had just suffered one of the biggest embarrassments of her life. The scene was still there like a monument to absolute failure. The wrecked car, the tow truck preparing to take away the remains of the SUV. The policeman with that look of boredom filling out the paperwork, and the neighbors watching everything as if it were a live episode of a reality show. But of course, she wasn't going to accept defeat so easily. When she saw that she couldn't convince the police that I was the villain in the story, she decided to change tactics. Suddenly, the explosive indignation gave way to a new approach, the role of victim. I've sacrificed so much to keep this community in order, and look how I'm being treated. I looked at the neighbors, waiting to see if anyone was going to fall for it. The silence said it all. Patricia continued her dramatic speech, holding her forehead as if she was about to faint right there in the middle of the street. I just want a nice, safe neighborhood, and now this. My car, my reputation. I was tempted to say that the only thing that was really bruised there was her ego, but I decided to keep quiet and just enjoy the show. The policeman had no patience left. Ma'am, the only reason your car is in this state is because you accelerated it against a fixed gate. This is considered destruction of private property and could result in criminal charges. The icing on the cake. If before she was in suffering victim mode, now Patricia activated absolute panic mode. What? This is ridiculous. I'm a respected leader in this community. You can't do this to me. Actually, Eliza stepped forward, her phone in hand. I think the community deserves to know about Patricia's other activities as HOA president. Everyone's attention shifted to Eliza, whose normally friendly demeanor had been replaced by something steely and determined. What are you talking about? Patricia snapped. I'm talking about the 3 families who moved out last year after you targeted them, Eliza said, her voice carrying clearly to all the gathered neighbors. I'm talking about the $50,000 from the HOA landscaping fund that somehow went to your husband's brother's company. And I'm especially talking about the interesting pattern of harassment against homeowners who own properties that coincidentally align with the proposed development your husband's firm is planning. A shocked murmur ran through the crowd. This was new information to most of the neighbors. And to me, that's slander. Patricia sputtered. It's all documented, Eliza replied calmly. As HOA secretary, I have access to all the records. I've been building the case for months. Bradley stepped forward. That's why I reached out to you, Dr. Sharma. I suspected something wasn't right, but I needed someone with access to the records. The policeman sighed and continued to fill in the report as if he was used to this kind of theater. Meanwhile, one of the tow truck drivers, a burly guy in his 50s who looked like he'd seen it all, looked at her car and shook his head. You did a good job wrecking this thing. Huh, lady? I've never seen such ugly damage caused by sheer stupidity. I almost choked with laughter inside. Her face turned as red as a tomato. This is harassment, she shouted, looking around trying to find someone who cared. Nobody cared. The winch started to lift the car, and it was at that moment that I realized that Patricia really didn't have a plan B. She thought she was going to come here, put on her show, come off as a hero, and maybe even make me break down my gate of my own accord. But now she'd only sunk further. It was then, as a last-ditch attempt to save herself, that she pulled out her cell phone and started typing frantically. I could bet she was posting something like, I am the victim of an absurd injustice. Community against me. Corrupt police. Because, of course, when reality isn't in their favor, these people always appeal to the court of the internet. Her problem? Everyone there saw exactly what happened. And you want to know the best part? One of the neighbors recorded the whole thing. Yes, Patricia tried to launch an alternative narrative online. But the truth was just a click away. Mr. Martinez, the one who watched everything with his arms crossed, smiled and raised his cell phone. If anyone wants to see the reality, I recorded it all, including the moment when she accelerated straight into the gate. And there was the final blow. Her face contorted in sheer despair as she realized there was nowhere left to run. I'm posting this to the neighborhood Facebook group right now, Mr. Martinez added, to growing chuckles from the crowd. But still, even after all this public humiliation, she tried one last trick. She turned to me, pointed a trembling finger, and let go. This isn't over yet. You don't understand who you're dealing with. Of course. The classic, you'll regret it, from someone who has already lost and just doesn't want to admit it. I did my best to hold in my laughter and just gave a lazy nod. Good luck with that. She snorted, spun on her heels, and got into an Uber that appeared like a miracle to rescue what was left of her dignity. Meanwhile, the police officer finished his report and handed me a copy. If you need to file a lawsuit for damages or trespassing, here's everything documented. But honestly, I think public humiliation was punishment enough. I agreed, but I knew Patricia wasn't going to let it go because people like that, when they lose, don't accept it. And I was sure she was still going to try something. Don't underestimate her. Eliza warned as the crowd began to disperse. She's cornered now, which makes her more dangerous. Her husband has connections with the mayor, the planning commission, even some judges. What's her endgame here? I asked. Why is my gate such a threat? Bradley, who had lingered after most neighbors returned to their homes, finally spoke up. It's not about your gate, Mr. Wilson. It's about your property. Your lot sits at a critical access point for a plan development. If they can force you out, the whole project becomes much more valuable. So that's why she targeted the other homeowners too. I asked, the pieces falling into place. Exactly, Eliza nodded. We need to be ready for what comes next. If there's one thing I've learned in this life, it's that some people just don't know how to lose. It doesn't matter how ridiculous their actions have been, how humiliated they've been, or how much everyone around them has made it clear that they're wrong. Some just can't accept reality. And Patricia, she was the classic case. After the car fiasco, the visit from the police, and the public humiliation, any normal person would have retreated into their own insignificance, rethought their life choices, and moved on. But not her. Over the next few days, I realized that something was strange. The first clue came when I received an official notice from the HOA saying that my gate was in serious violation of community guidelines and needed to be removed immediately. It was almost funny. Did she really think that after ramming an SUV into my gate and going through all that embarrassment, I was just going to comply with an order coming from the very association she controlled? I took the paper, crumpled it up, and threw it straight in the trash. But that was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, little things started to happen. One day I woke up to find an infringement notice stuck to my door. Then fines started coming in from the HOA for inadequate property maintenance. And my house was better looked after than any other on the street. And then came the reports from the neighbors. Apparently, she was going door to door telling the story of how I was a problem resident and was destroying the community spirit of the neighborhood. The best part? Nobody believed her. The video of the accident had already been circulated among the neighbors. Everyone knew what had really happened, but she still insisted. Eliza and Bradley kept me updated on Patricia's behind-the-scenes maneuvers. She had convinced her husband to hire a private investigator to dig up dirt on me. She had also reached out to contacts at the city planning department to find technical violations they could cite me for. She's desperate, Bradley explained during a clandestine meeting at Eliza's house. The development deal is worth millions, and they need your property to make it work. You realize what this means, right? Eliza asked, spreading out documents across her kitchen table. We need to go on the offensive. Together, we formed a plan. Instead of just reacting to Patricia's harassment, we would expose the entire scheme. At the height of her desperation, Patricia went so far as to schedule an emergency HOA meeting to discuss legal action against my illegal gate and me. Well, I went. If there's one thing I've learned throughout my life, it's that when someone wants to take you down, the worst mistake you can make is to turn your back and walk away. So I showed up at that meeting, sat in the front row, and waited for her to start her little show. And my God, what a show. She stood up in front of everyone, paperwork in hand, and started making speeches as if she were leading a revolution. This neighborhood has always been a place of respect where we follow the rules and maintain order. But now we're facing a serious problem. A resident has decided to install a gate that is a real risk to the safety of us all. She put her hands on her chest as if she were holding back a dramatic cry. You saw what happened to my car. I could have been seriously injured. What if it had been a child? What if it had been an elderly person? This gate is a tragedy waiting to happen. At this point, you could hear some bored sighs in the audience. Even the most loyal HOA members were clearly uncomfortable, but she didn't notice. She continued her speech as if she were the neighborhood's last hope, until a voice from the back of the room cut through the silence. The lady crashed her car into his gate on purpose. That was Mr. Martinez. And now you want us to believe that it was his fault? I'm sorry, but this is already ridiculous. And that's when everything started to fall apart for good. Other neighbors began to murmur. Some shook their heads. One older lady even let out a quiet, "For heaven's sake." And then Mrs. Peterson, the one who always watched everything with her cup of tea, raised her hand. I just wanted to understand one thing. If the gate is so dangerous, why was it your car that broke down and not it? Patricia turned red. She opened her mouth but couldn't say anything. For the first time, she realized that no one there was buying her story. It was beautiful. That's when I nodded to Eliza, who stood up with a thick folder in her hands. As HOA secretary, I think it's time we addressed some financial irregularities that have come to light, she announced, her voice calm but carrying. Patricia's eyes widened in panic. This meeting is about the gate violation, not. Actually, Bradley interrupted, also standing. As a board member, I second Dr. Sharma's motion to address the financial issues immediately. What followed was a methodical, devastating presentation by Eliza, showing with documentation how Patricia had diverted HOA funds, selectively enforced rules against homeowners whose properties were needed for the development plan, and even falsified meeting minutes to push through decisions that had never actually been voted on. The meeting quickly got out of hand. People started talking about how tired they were of the way the HOA was run, how Patricia was calling the shots without consulting anyone. One guy in the background even suggested that she be removed from office. And that's when the final blow came. Bradley, Patricia's own nephew, stood up and addressed the room. As both an HOA board member and a town council representative, I feel obligated to inform everyone that I've submitted these documents to the district attorney's office for review. There's substantial evidence of fraud, misappropriation of funds, and abuse of authority. Total silence. Patricia swallowed. I tried to hold back a smile, but it was difficult. And then, to top it all off, Mr. Martinez, who had clearly had enough, looked directly at her and said, "Maybe it's time you stopped trying to control everyone and worried more about your own problems. Like, for example, your new car." The final blow. She huffed, grabbed the papers, turned on her heels, and left the meeting without saying another word. And so ended the reign of the woman who thought she could bring down a steel gate with the sheer force of arrogance. For the next few days, the silence was absolute. No new fines, no notifications. Nothing. It was as if she had finally accepted defeat, or maybe she was just licking her wounds. A week later, news broke that Patricia's husband was under investigation for corruption related to the development deal. Patricia herself was named in a civil suit filed by former HOA board members for financial mismanagement. Bradley was elected interim HOA president. with a mandate to reform the bylaws to prevent future abuses. Eliza continued her role as secretary, now with the full support of the community. As for me, I installed security cameras just in case. But Patricia never bothered me again. Her husband's legal troubles forced them to sell their house and leave the neighborhood entirely. The important thing was that the gate was still standing. Her car, on the other hand, well, that was never seen again. If you like this video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.